Hello and good morning. Hope you're all doing well today. And as always, if not, it's all relative. Things are always changing. One minute we feel this, the next we feel that. You might hear my chickens feeling whatever they're feeling, singing their egg songs. But I wanted to come on here today and talk about maybe the most elusive thing in all of life, health. Why is it that so many people are so confused with health, with being healthy, getting healthy, sickness, diet, what to eat? And I want to share a perspective that it's definitely not the normal perspective, but it's something that I've been exploring for over 20 years and has made, over time, perfect sense to me. So if you're someone that's just completely lost about health and you've tried all the diets and the different modalities and things, maybe this will make some sense. So part of the inspiration for this is that my partner Aja is pregnant and we're actually due any moment now. Due date was technically a few days ago, so we're just kind of living life until our baby wants to come into this world. And we're very excited for her, and we've been putting in just so much energy and presence into the process, and we look forward to inviting her to the world. And I'll share more, I'm sure, as time comes. However, part of pregnancy, there's so much confusion around it, and there's so many different things people say. You got to do this, you can only eat that, and and we really wanted to see what it would be like to just tune into our own understanding, our own experience, just like we always do. We don't want to suddenly say, oh, okay, we're pregnant now, let's just take on this whole new modality and just rigidly follow that. It's like, no, what's the way in which we live, and how can we integrate this pregnancy and take things day by day? And we were looking at, postpartum, and there's a lot of these different things with, say, Ayurveda, with Chinese medicine, and there's all these, interesting foods people are supposed to eat, and, start with this and that, and this is for digestion, and that's for this, and what have you. And just kind of been really tuning into that question and questioning a lot of it, as we often do. And something that I've noticed is in certain disciplines, of course we have the Western Medical Society and all these things, but in certain disciplines like Ayurveda, which is an ancient practice from Asia, really from India, and Chinese medicine, which is probably equally, I don't know, I'm not very good with dates and stuff, but equally if not more ancient. They've both been around for thousands and thousands of years, and they've done a lot of good for a lot of people, and they make a lot of sense for people that have used them and had a great benefit. However, we're living in the modern world. We live in America. It's a completely different place, a different reality, a different climate, a different way of being, a different understanding. And while things like Ayurveda and Chinese medicine and these other modalities, they might work and they might have, some truth to them. I think what people tend to miss out on, and I don't mean to single these two out, I mean anything in general, any modality that you're following, is that when you're following some modality that doesn't come from your own experience, from your own environment, it's easy to miss the heart of what they're talking about. And before I get deeper into that, let me kind of use a bit of an analogy that I like to talk about often, which is Buddhism. Forgive me, it's early, I got a little phlegmy in my throat. In Buddhism, one of the biggest principles, of Buddhism is understanding the heart of suffering and seeing that life is impermanent, and that when we cling and we hold on to things that are impermanent, we ultimately have suffering. And the Buddha, supposedly, never met the guy, went out into the world and saw these things happening and was like, okay, there is suffering going on in the world, and this is the reason for suffering, and I want to find a way sort of out of that and to help people out of this world of suffering. Now, if you were to look at the Buddha and say, oh wow, this person's enlightened and they're super peaceful, and they walk around wearing robes and sandals or barefoot, and they eat 1 grain of rice at a time. You say, well, if I do those things, well then, I'll eventually get somewhere at least close to where the Buddha was, right? But the problem is we're not looking at the heart of the Buddha's teachings. We're looking at, the surface, which on the surface, what you're seeing is just the illusion. It's the superficial piece that we can try to copy, but it doesn't really mean anything. It's just like with the Beatles, what made the Beatles great wasn't that they had the haircuts and they did this and what made the Beatles great was the pursuit that they were on, the path that they were on, the amount of time and hours they spent, and their love for music. And just because a record label is like, oh, let's get some other 4 guys that are funny and cut their hairs in a similar way and put them in some funny suits, and then we'll have our own Beatles. Like, yeah, maybe you make a little bit of money, maybe it's good for a while, but what makes the Beatles is their journey, is their unique experience and way of seeing the world. So to go back to Ayurveda and Chinese medicine, these different ancient time terms of practices and different things like that, well, I think the heart of what they're trying to get at makes a lot of sense. And if you look at the very basic meaning of something like Ayurveda and looking at the seasonality of it and why they cook what they cook and how, you know, during, for example, postpartum, eating foods that are easy to digest and warming and stuff like that, it makes perfect sense. But if you're just going to say like, oh, Ayurveda's been around for a long time, let me just import all these spices and all these ingredients and not think about where I live and the natural world around me, and let me just eat exactly as they ate. Well, newsflash, you're living in a completely different environment, and that might not make sense to you. It might make sense and it might be helpful, but what I see more often than not is the reason people struggle with these ancient forms of medicines and ancient forms of diets is because, you know, it sounds good on the outside and there's a whole practice around it and there's 5,000 years of history. So of course you're going to be like, oh wow, well this is way better than our medical system. And I'm sure, you know, in many ways it is. However, we're missing the key and the heart of it. So what Aj and I have been talking about, and the reason I bring this up is because I hope that it maybe opens your eyes up to if there's something you're going through. What we've been talking about is that, okay, we can look at the heart of these things and make sense of them, but we don't have to just import spices and things all the time from around the world. We can actually look to what's local, what's around us, our environment. So one example is, you know, I do a ton of fermentation. I recently put a book out about fermentation. It's called Fermenting with Your Best Friend. Of course, you can check it out via the link below and all that goodness. But to me, the book is less about just like, hey, fermentation is good for you and you should go do it, and more about understanding like the essence of what fermentation is and how anywhere, no matter where you are, what ingredients you have access to, you can ferment foods and bring life to them and help to break down nutrients and all this good stuff. So we love to ferment, but you know, when you look at a lot of these like things like Ayurveda, I keep bringing up Ayurveda for a reason, but you know, they're mostly eating rice and they're eating things like khichdi, which is rice and dal and spices, which again, great if you're in India and can be great here too. But most of what we eat is fermented wheat. We mostly eat sourdough. I actually recently just cooked some wheat berries and I fermented them as well. And yesterday fermented oats and made oat milk with fermented oats and things like that. And one of the benefits of fermenting is that you're bringing in life into the foods. But even if you're cooking them, the life that you're bringing in on the early stages is actually breaking down the nutrients, unlocking minerals, nutrients, and things that you otherwise wouldn't have access to. And a bit of a side note, but I was watching this documentary, I think called Sustainable or Sustainability. You can find it on YouTube for free. Rick Bayless is in it and some other great chefs. It takes place all, you know, in Chicago, and just kind of showing how farmers are doing amazing things to connect to chefs in cities and the connection between that. Anyway, this one woman was talking about, and don't quote me on this, but she was basically saying that grains, at least specifically wheat, maybe more, have some sort of like anti-digestion like blocker in them, and the only way to get rid of that is to ferment it. I had never heard that before, and I'm not saying I can't, again, don't quote me on it, but the concept of like, oh, maybe these grains that we're eating like need some sort of help, they need some sort of support so we can digest them properly, makes sense. The reason I bring that up, I had to go in a freaking circle right now, and again, when I record, I just press record and start talking, and it's early morning and it's quite a beautiful day. I thought it'd be nice to just get on here and chat with y'all. But when we ferment grains and we make them more easy to digest and more bioavailable to us, well, to me, if I can get wheat, especially wheat that's more local around here, and I can ferment it and eat that, I would prefer that often over rice. Now, I love rice, I love eating rice, but something like white rice, it's a starch, and a lot of the nutrients are often taken away from it. And even though it's a great vehicle and delicious for many things, the more I get into food and the deeper I go, I'm like, oh, okay, if I were just to blindly follow something like Ayurveda, I might say, okay, yeah, rice is great. In India, they've been eating it for thousands and thousands of years. Let me just eat it and I'll be healthy. But then it's incongruent with being here and being like, well, what about seasonality? What about locality? Because what was seasonal and what was available to people in India was just that. They're not, 5,000 years ago, they're not importing all kinds of things from other countries and saying, what do I want to eat today? Do I want this or do I want that? And what about a little bit of this? And again, to me, the modern world that has access to these things, I'm not knocking on it. I get it, and I've taken it to my advantage many times. But the deeper I connect to place, the deeper I connect to nature, the more obvious it becomes, where it's like, yeah, they were eating that, and they developed a whole regime around that, a whole science, a whole medical view, whatever you want to call it, because that's what they had available to them. So if we're just saying, well, okay, it must have been the rice and it must have been the spices, let me get all those things, well, we're missing the heart of what's actually going on, which is why I always connect deeper to place. And that's been a big thing for Aja and I here. It's like, yeah, nothing wrong with, getting things that we feel inspired to get and whatever, but as I get deeper and deeper on this journey, I'm just like, I just want to eat what's simple. I want to eat what I grow or what farmers around me grow. And if you open my pantry, there are plenty of things that are still imported, but over time it went from like 90% to now maybe 10 or 15%, and most of the things that we're eating are things that we've either grown, foraged, or gotten locally around us. And the reason I also share this is I'm not trying to like make people feel guilty or shameful about their own choices. It's never about that. I'm not someone who's going to come on here and like, oh, you got to go zero waste, or you can only eat local. No, but when you tune into these subtle frequencies, when you start to tune into these more simple ways of being, slowly over time, it just naturally shifts. You don't have to get overwhelmed and be like, oh, I need to open my pantry and throw everything out and just say, screw it all. You can slowly over time make these different choices and realize that, okay, yeah, maybe local foods are going to be more expensive, or maybe I'm not used to eating them and don't enjoy them as much, but slowly as you get into that vibe, it becomes more delicious. It becomes cheaper in the long run. I was watching a thing Dr. Zach Bush was talking about, and there was two pieces to it. One, he was saying how when he eats like fresh fruit and food, like tomatoes and stuff, he likes to lean over and eat it right off the vine, because he's like, the minute you pick it, it's starting to be in the decay process, the death process. So energetically, vitality, if you're eating things when they're literally still growing and living, that there's a certain vitality to that. And while that's a nice sentiment, I've done it myself. I can't say this. The majority of the food I eat is not going to be straight out the vine. But the concept was interesting. And along with that, he was talking about, on this, I think the Minimalist podcast, they were just saying, like, to what extent is it even, better to just open your pantry and throw out all these things, because you're like, oh, this has all plastic and this is all imported, let me just throw out all my cleaning supplies and cooking goods and buy all new stuff. It's like that ends up being more wasteful than just using what you have and then slowly changing those choices. Same with like us doing a lot of dumpster diving, where to me it makes more sense to go into a dumpster, especially when the food's organic, and rescue a lot of stuff that would otherwise be thrown out, or they say composted, but city composting, I've heard mixed things about, and some issues that happen with that. So I'd rather reuse stuff or use things that are going to go bad, feed them to my animals, feed them to ourselves if it's good quality and what have you, than just buy fresh things just because it's we walk into the store and you pay money. Now, of course, I still do that, but again, the more I get into the world of food and the world of health, it just becomes more obvious that what's around you, what's available to you, is going to make more sense. Yes, maybe and maybe will be the last point of this video, there are people peddling these superfoods all over the world. It's like, oh, you got to try this new superfood, and this has 10 times as much this as that. And it's like, yeah, cool, but you're importing it from somewhere, and oftentimes when you see the impact that has on these smaller economies and these villages and places where this is what people just grew up eating, just because it's a trendy thing and somebody can sell it as having 10 times as much antioxidants as blueberries or whatever, doesn't necessarily mean it's just going to be better for you automatically. It's like the supplement industry. There's no regulation on it. People just put things in pills and they're like, oh, take these pills. It'll, if you get 10,000% of the vitamin C you need. It just doesn't make any sense to me. I'm, again, not against supplements. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm not a doctor or anything like that, but I don't personally take supplements, and I know some can be helpful for people, and there's fish oils and different things, magnesium, but for me, I just don't. I just, rely on getting it through good food. Now, the argument of the soil being depleted of all the nutrients and all those things, I get that, and for some people, they might feel they need supplements, but to me, food is energy, and the more connected I am to it, the better energy I put into my body, not just food, but all energy, sounds, people I'm around, places. There's so many things that we consume, and they all play a role. So I could go on and on about that, but that's neither here nor there. I do talk about that more in my book. But point being, if you're someone that's feeling stuck and lost and confused in this endlessly crazy world of food and what to eat, know that the journey is slow, and that if somebody's selling you some kind of crazy, this is the best life-changing thing, they'll take it and you'll feel good for a bit, and then there'll be another thing that somebody's selling that's even better, and you'll take it and you'll feel good for a bit, and then There's this never-ending cycle of people trying to heal because we're grasping. But when we stop grasping, when we start tuning into ourselves, when we start looking around about what is, and we start listening to our bodies and listening to nature, things just slowly start to change. And it's not sexy, it's not flashy, it's not the most exciting thing that you can, get all jazzed up about and start telling all your friends about necessarily. But it does just make sense. It's simple as can be, that which cannot be simpler. Yeah, well, that's all we have to say.